So I want to talk today a little bit more about discovery. This has been something you may have seen me talk about this last week. If you're a member of the mailing list, you have heard me or read me speaking about this. Like discovery is this thing that I think is, so underrated in the sales process. And people have asked me, how do I balance my time in discovery with my time prospecting? And it's like, hold on, there's nothing to balance. Like you make phone calls so you can ultimately schedule meetings with people so you can discover about their problems. And in my last video, my last live training, I talked about how when you are discovering them, they should also be discovering you. And if you do discovery right, if you do it well, if you do it properly, discovery is the turning point at which the sales process starts to move in the right direction. So I want you to go back. I want you to take a look at that video lesson. I want you to remember the 6 things that great discovery brings with it. Great discovery creates connection. It creates understanding. It creates tension, creates context. It demonstrates expertise, and it creates a level of comfort for your prospects to ultimately buy from you. Now, what I want to talk about this week is a little bit different. I want to talk about how brave you need to be to do good discovery. Right. Last week, I kind of gave you a different kind of checklist. I gave you a checklist of what you would like to have happen as a result of your discovery, but I didn't tell you how to do it. And I initially thought I might tell you how to do it, but as I got through almost a half an hour of just going through those 6 categories there, I said, man, another lesson on top of this might be a bit much. Let me break this up a little bit. So this week, I want to go into a framework that I'm developing called the 3 levels of great discovery. Right? There are questions, 3 different levels of questions, and they build on one another. And I want you to start paying attention to not just the questions you ask, but how you answer, or how you, not just the questions you ask, but how you ask them, and how you wait for the answers, and how you use the context of the answers to go another level higher, or maybe this gets flipped around, and maybe you go a level deeper. Okay. I've talked about this recently on a couple of different podcasts. I was on the Sales Hustle podcast with Colin Mitchell. I was on the 30 Minutes to President's Club podcast with Armand and Nick. And we talked about this framework a little bit, unpacked it a little bit. Also have an episode on my Deeper Thought podcast that just covers this. So it's something I've been working on, thinking about, developing over the last few weeks. And I think it's ready to share with you here. So that's what we're going to do. Now, I titled this lesson, "Are You Brave Enough to Do Great Discovery?" And I want to preface those 3 levels with this concept of bravery. So many people feel that discovery is just this checklist of things that you need to verify, right? I go to the classic BANT checklist: budget, authority, need, timeline. Things like, are you dealing with the decision maker? Are there other people who need to be involved? Who else might need to weigh in on this decision, Mr. Prospect? Things like that. And while that is certainly stuff that you need to know, right? It has an impact. I think if you limit discovery to just a fact-finding mission, you miss a lot. And so many salespeople play it safe. They play it safe because they know there are those things they need to discover. They know there are those concepts they need to learn about, but they never take it to the next level, and they never really deepen the connection or the rapport that they have with their prospect because they're afraid to ask questions that they don't have a good idea of what the answer is. And the thing is, if you think about any conversation that you've ever had with anybody, any really good, inspiring conversation that you just leave feeling fulfilled with, those fulfilling conversations, they don't go the way most of your discovery conversations go, right? Like, and I mentioned this last week too. Like, if your discovery sessions feel more like interrogations than interviews, you're doing it wrong. There should be a discussion. There should be a back and forth, Remember, you're discovering them, they're discovering you. So what do you do to create more intimacy? What do you do to create more vulnerability? What do you do to create more of a connection? Well, you pay really close attention to the answers and you ask questions with regard to their initial answers in ways that develop more of that connection, right? And I'm stumbling over myself here, but when you ask questions and then hear answers and then are willing to ask that next prying question, not because you planned to on your script, but because this is what you really want to know. When you ask questions that you weren't planning to ask, you're allowing the conversation to go somewhere that you didn't plan on it going. This is scary for a salesperson, but also necessary for a good connecting conversation. So that is the kind of the overarching theme that I want to present to you before we get into these three levels, because bravery is vitally important, right? If you're not brave enough to ask questions that you don't know the answers to, if you're not brave enough to let go a little bit of control of that sales conversation, you're not going to be doing what you need to do. You're not going to be accomplishing what you need to accomplish in the discovery process. So let's not forget what we're trying to do here, right? We're not trying to fill out a survey. We're trying to create a connection and plant the seeds for a beautiful relationship. And you have to be willing to go where most salespeople aren't willing to go in order to do that. So let me get into these levels of questioning. I think level one is to ask questions that your prospect doesn't know the answers to. So what do I mean by that? And of course, you don't want to ask questions that you know the answers to, right? Like the very basic thing, and I've talked about this at length, is don't ask questions that you can find out on your own, right? Like if you're starting at a remedial level here, like now you're starting to waste the prospect's time, your customer's time. But you've got to be someone who can figure out enough of their own information, do enough of your own discovery on your own, that you can have a good platform to start this discovery process with your client in real time. So what I want you to do here with level one, ask questions that your prospect does not know the answer to. And I learned this questioning technique from Jeffrey Gitomer years ago in the Little Red Book of Selling. He referred to asking power questions, right? So the idea is that you ask a question that makes your prospect stop, think, consider new information, and then hopefully answer in terms of you. So what you want to do here is create a little tension. You want to give them something to think about. Now, sure, they can come up with an answer. I'm not talking about questions that are going to make your prospect go back to their research department and try to find the answers to. But what you want to do here is give them something to think about. You want to let them think in terms of the differences that you bring to the table with your solution. You want to make them think in terms of a different way to solve their problem. Maybe they think you and your competitors are all the same. And maybe by asking this question, you are setting the table to help them understand that you're not. And maybe you can get them thinking so differently that you are clearly the only choice and the competitors don't even exist. Now, when you get really good, that's what you can accomplish. You're certainly not going to accomplish that by just asking them if they have the budget set aside or the funds available to pay for this, or if they're actually the decision maker, or if they need to go get a grown-up to help them, right? So you want to start by asking questions that they don't know the answer to. So what is it that would, Mr. Prospect, if we got together and we did this sales training project together, what would that mean for your team? And what does that make possible if your team were able to hit its goals this year? And then if your team hit its goals this year with the additional revenue and the additional investing power you can make, what would you do with that in order to continue to reinvest in that team? What would your company look like? What would it make possible for your company? Those are questions that are going to make your prospect think. Now, depending on how they answer, You may have more follow-up questions to ask. Now, these level 1 questions, you can script them. You can have these. You're probably not going to get to them all, but what are the things that you want to what are the things that you want to learn? What are the things that you want to, where do you want to start this conversation? What are what are the concepts that you need to make sure that you learn about in this discovery framework? Write those down. Ask them. That is where the scripting ends. Because level 2 is you want to ask your prospect questions that you don't know the answers to. This is a level that most people don't get to. Most people stop at level 1 questions, right? Again, they're trying to uncover some objections. They're trying to get they're trying to get an understanding of the desired future state. The pretty standard sales stuff, right? But where most people are afraid to go is this level, where based on those answers that they get, you have to ask qualification, clarification questions. If your prospect answers in a way that you weren't familiar, well, dig in. What did you mean by that? Can you tell me a little bit more about what that investment looks like? So, okay, you're telling me that if you invest in some sales training, your team will perform better. If your team performs better, you can hit your goals, and then there's going to be more profit in the business. A portion of that you're willing to spend to reinvest in your team. But I didn't think that you were going to tell me. I'm surprised when you told me that you would rather add headcount than make a deeper investment in technology for your team or get them some new coaching or whatever. Why would you make that decision? Help me understand why you would go that way instead of this other way. You're off the rails at this point. The conversation has left the scripted pathway. The conversation is gone off road, right? Now, this is why I think the people who go here are able to make these deeper connections, because at this point, your prospect knows that they're dealing with a real person. They're no longer dealing with anybody who's robotic or scripted. You've got to be able to think on your feet at this point. And so many people can't. And they can't because they don't practice, because they're not willing to, because they're scared to, and on and on and on. So now, and you've heard me talk about this before, not only does your product or your solution have to be differentiated, you've got to differentiate yourself in the way you go about selling. This is a night and day difference, right? This is a night and day difference between a real professional and someone who's just going through the motions. So all of a sudden, when your prospect realizes that you've gone off script, now you can start to have a little fun. Now you can really go places, dig in, ask questions that will help you understand their motivation. You're asking questions that are giving you some insight into their personality. You're asking questions that will get into just their personal desires, what motivates them, what they want to accomplish with this company, what they want to accomplish with their team, whatever it may be with the context that you're dealing with. But you learn things that will help you ultimately close the sale or advance the sale at the very least, because you were willing to lose control of the sales process in a minor fashion, right? Let's think about this. Get this thing out of my way. You're willing to give up a little bit of control in this sales conversation to ultimately gain more leverage in the sales process. I don't know where this is going to go, which means I can't control the outcome. And I'm going to ask more questions that I don't know the answers to. My prospect's going to give me even, answers that are even further away than where I intended to go. I'm going to learn more and more important and valuable things about my prospect by being willing to go off road than I would if I stayed in my lane. And so maybe you think of it as a risk reward, or maybe you're just not brave enough to go there. But when you step back and cede some of the control, you gain opportunities to learn new insights, real insights, powerful insights that will help you ultimately close that sale. If you stay in your lane like everybody else stays in their lane, you're going to be considered along the same lines as everybody else. And it's not going to help you be seen favorably at all. You've got to be willing to step out of the box. You got to be willing to, go a little rogue. You got to be willing to ask the questions that other people won't ask so that you can learn the things that other people won't learn. And when you learn things other people won't learn, you can solve problems that other people can't solve. And when you solve problems that other people can't solve, you make sales that other people won't make. So think about that. So what's the next level? Level 3, this is where it kind of gets fun. If it hasn't already been fun. I think these kind of conversations are great. So call me crazy, but I love selling. And this is the best part of the sales process. Phase 3, level 3, whatever you want to call them, ask questions that neither of you know the answers to. These are forward-looking questions. These are daydreaming kind of questions. I like to describe these as the questions that, you can proverbially wrap your arm around the shoulders of your prospects and you look off into the distance and you start thinking about, okay, what could happen if we work together? What becomes possible if we were to embark on this project and get the answers or the solutions, we get the outcomes that we're looking for, and then we take another step, and then we take another step. You can't just jump to this kind of question. You have to earn the right to ask this question. But you earn the right to ask this question by asking good questions up front and building some credibility. You earn the right to ask these questions by asking those level 2 questions, again, of being vulnerable, going off the road a little bit, going outside of your lane, and being vulnerable, right? You've got credibility and then vulnerability, and now you get to look forward. Now you get to daydream, like I mentioned. Now you get to start painting a picture of what could be possible. And if you're willing to do this with your client, they're going to have no choice but to think differently about the way you sell. They're going to think differently about the solution you provide. You are going to stand out in their memory as someone who creates a really meaningful, valuable experience for them. And they're going to look to you as the expert for when they need to solve problems like this in the future. Now, I talked about this a little bit in the last lesson. And I want to kind of reiterate here. The way that you create comfort in the buying process and the likelihood of you getting referrals and having really loyal customers is dependent on the way you ask these questions. Think about the rep who goes through their checklist, learns what they need to learn, has more of an interrogation instead of an interview, and let's say they make the deal. Let's say they win. Does that process, the way I talk about it, does that inspire you at all? Do you think that inspires your clients or their clients to go tell their friends and rave about their experience? Not so much. Whereas if in the discovery process, I show you a different way of thinking about things, and then based on the way you answer those questions, I'm willing to get vulnerable, show you that I am not a robot, willing to show you that I'm another human being who's very, very interested in some things. And I'm willing to go deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where I may have to schedule a second discovery meeting because this conversation was just too good to end on time. Now we've started to create a bond. Now we've started to share an experience. And then if I'm willing to go deeper still and say, wow, well, what if this? What could we create here? Now I've separated myself. Discovery has gone not from an interrogation to an interview, but it's gone from an interrogation to an experience. It's gone from interrogation to interview to indelible. You can't forget, you can't unexperience a conversation like that. You've had a few of those conversations. You can think about them. And you've had those kinds of conversations with people who are still close with you, probably still close with you today. There's some of your closest relationships. And there's some of your closest relationships because those are the conversations and the people you're willing to have them with where you can go places you just can't go with other people. This is not manipulative. This is not contrived. This is not anything. This is your genuine curiosity, your genuine interest, and your willingness to be vulnerable with both. Remember, you can't be truly curious unless you're willing to be wrong. So when someone makes you think on their feet a little bit, you're showing them that you're willing to be influenced. You're showing them that you are willing to learn from them, that this is a two-way street. That's what real connections are made of. That's where real, true, strong bonds come from. Which kind of relationship would you prefer to have with your prospects? One that's just kind of transactional, or one that could lead to referrals and loyalty and all kinds of the good, the fulfillment that comes along with a really, truly trusted and and loyal customer. That's what I want you to think about. So what have I made you think about here? Leave a comment. Let me know. Is something, are you thinking a little bit differently about the way you approach discovery? Are you recognizing what becomes possible if you're willing to go there, or are you just trying to check a box? Think about that. Your results will get astronomically better and a lot more quickly than you think. And I appreciate you watching this. I'll have another one for you next week, and I'll talk to you again soon.